Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Inside the Marble Palace, Saskatchewan Post Media's look at the goings on in Saskatchewan politics. I'm Murray Mandrick, political columnist with Leader Post and Star Phoenix. With me, Jeremy Symes, who is our legislative reporter, and from the Leader Post, and from the Star Phoenix, Phil Tank, who is now a digital guru, a columnist, and a jack of all trades, which is why we have him here. So
I'm
thanks for
still
joining us.
working on the guru part, but
Still working on you're doing pretty good at the guru part, I think. I'm going to start with you, Jeremy, on COVID. You did an interview with Health Minister Paul Merriman, who does not see it as a huge problem in terms of hospitals overcrowding because of the current COVID situation. Doctors tell us otherwise. Can you give us a summation as to what the issues are?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Monday, the province lifted all the remaining mandates. So no more masks, no more self-isolation, that sort of thing. What's interesting is there was no big government announcement about this. It just happened, no big celebration. But yeah, so people not needing to wear masks or self-isolate if they have COVID. So meanwhile, this is happening. We're still seeing a lot of hospitalizations in Saskatchewan. This is quite different from in July when we lifted everything, where hospitalizations were about 55, but now we're told it's around the 365 mark. So I spoke to Health Minister Paul Merriman about this just to get a sense of, we're still seeing all these hospitalizations, but what he told me is it is manageable. Healthcare staff can manage these current numbers right now. He said about 150 to 160 are in a hospital specifically for COVID, while the remainder are incidentals. Now, this is kind of happening as the province continued the emergency order, which means they can move around healthcare workers anywhere in the province to manage the pandemic, which is interesting because it's happening at the same time that all these restrictions have lifted. Now, I asked Merriman about this, does this send the wrong signal? He says, no, this is not confusing to people. Meanwhile, we have healthcare workers saying, the government's doesn't really care about us and what we're doing. We're still having to work really hard and we're stressed and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the situation we are in right now in Saskatchewan. I guess it's fair to add that the government is lifting these restrictions because they think people are tired of wearing masks, having to follow rules. They don't feel people want to do this anymore. And so that's why we are lifting them now.
Well, I think they are tired, Phil, and I think in one way, in terms of the political war for the hearts and minds of Saskatchewan people, Scott Moe's timing is very good. I think people are really even tired about hearing COVID stories or problems in the hospitals. But two things that I'm mildly interested in, and some things that you've kind of looked at. How are we stacking up nationally? How big a problem might this be, notwithstanding Health Minister Merriman's insistence that it's not a problem? And I guess from the political spectrum, does this not eventually catch up to government if we have a situation in which hospitals do become overcrowded and other action, as Jeremy described, like having to extend emergency order so we can move healthcare workers around, becomes more of an issue than it is? They're going into the session right now, and that question is going to be raised quite frequently, isn't it, Phil?
well, it's certainly telling that they've removed all of the restrictions, but they're keeping the emergency order in place, which tells you not everything is fine. And of course, the deaths we're seeing here are high as well. In other jurisdictions where they're removing uh, restrictions, they're sort of basing it on hospitalizations. And I think I saw Premier Doug Ford from Ontario say the other day, I want to get, I think it was a mask he wanted to get rid of, and he said, but I'll wait for the health officials to give me the go on that and wait for their advice. That's not the way we went here. We had Dr. Shahab warning us in January to stop gathering, and then the premier started to talk about, well, it's time to get rid of these restrictions. After I think it's pretty obvious a very concerted lobbying effort. It struck me, the deaths. This is one of the deadliest months. February is one of the deadliest months of the pandemic already, and it's going to be tough for us to figure out exactly how many. I've seen different, and I think the province's switch to weekly reporting has kind of backfired on them, because I've seen people try to estimate the deaths, and they've estimated too high. So it's not working in their favor. I think they do well. I'm not sure they're going to, but I think they do well to sort of clarify. Okay, here's where we are. We caused some confusion with the switch from daily to weekly. Here's at least how, and the deaths is maybe the only statistic we can, and hospitalizations, of course, is really the only statistic we have left, because PCR testing has shrunk to nothing. I noticed though last week, even with the severe restrictions on PCR testing, and this has happened all across Canada, but perhaps not as much in other provinces here, we're still second behind Alberta in per capita cases diagnosed, which is quite something to still be hanging in there at that high level.
One thing that I'm interested in, politically speaking, there are tremendous distractions for the Saskatchewan Party government ongoing. We're going to see the start of the session next week, which means the focus will be on the budget, and maybe it won't be as bad news with $100 plus oil coming into play. But in the more immediate things, there's the NDP leadership issues that we'll get into in a moment, but there's also a huge problem on the world stage with the invasion of Ukraine that hits close to home. In some ways, it's kind of unifying in a province that has a high percentage of Ukrainians that have immigrated to Saskatchewan and to obviously to Canada. Jeremy, you've done some stuff on it, particularly in relation to some of the things that people are pushing the government to do, which is basically to sever all ties economically and otherwise with Russia. How is this playing out politically, and what is the government's reaction to something like Evraz Place that, at least in Regina, is a huge part of our economy and our community, and makes for a bit of a difficult situation for the government? How has Scott Moe and the government played this, and how is it playing out?
Right, for sure. Lots of Ukraine news this past week. I mean, like you mentioned, we have a big Ukrainian population in Saskatchewan, or just people with Ukrainian roots. So um, it's no surprise we're seeing a lot of outpouring for support here. I guess politically, the government they're announcing a few things that they've done. They're increasing their donations. SaskTel is letting people text overseas at no charge. They're trying to advance immigration into Saskatchewan from Ukraine. So they are trying to send that message that they really care. They've called on the federal government here to implement harsh sanctions against Russia because of the invasion that they've done in Ukraine. Now, it is really interesting that we do have, at least Evraz for sure, has those Russian ties. And what that all means here is it's really unclear, because the shareholders of Evraz are mainly Russian oligarchs. There's this one in particular, but he hasn't been sanctioned here, so that really allows, I guess, Evraz to continue working. If he were to be sanctioned, I guess there would be economic impacts. It's really unclear what those economic impacts would be. When we look at the NDP and their response to this, they're not playing politics in a way, so to speak, about it. They're trying to keep a really neutral tone throughout all of this. So that's kind of the change that, I mean, I've noticed. At least there's not too much fighting back and forth between the two parties. There's more of this sense of, let's just unite behind Ukraine about it. But everyone is watching right now in terms of what this means for the Saskatchewan economy. Still really unclear. I mean, it has meant higher oil prices. It's meant higher potash prices, which is great for our provincial coffers. And we'll see what this means for the budget. And it's great for businesses here. But that also means higher gas prices. That might mean higher food prices. On top of inflation, it just could make things more costly. So we're all still kind of watching to see what it'll mean, and what the government's reaction will be to that too.
Do you sense a unifying element within Saskatchewan, politically and otherwise, is related to this? We are probably facing as great an external threat as, certainly I can recall, going back to with the initial invasion of Afghanistan by the old Soviets. I'm too young to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we haven't had many of these in our lives. How, from what you're seeing in Saskatoon, where there is a substantial Ukrainian population as well, how are people reacting in your assessment, Phil? And what do you see the outcome of that reaction to be in this province?
Yeah, well, it's not surprising that we've seen, demonstrations at, here in Saskatoon and in Regina. Obviously there are a lot of people, and this goes beyond the people who are of Ukrainian descent, but obviously means a lot to them. This is a kind of a unifying thing. It's tough to sort of, yeah, I think I read somewhere that Putin was trying to take advantage of the disunity among the West, and now, of course, they're completely unified. It was interesting. There probably is an argument. It's no mystery, beyond military might, where Putin gets his power from, and that's from oil and gas. And of course, that's an issue here, right? And of course, we've seen voices already, including the premier, saying, why are we relying on Russian oil and gas at all? Why do we not build more pipelines? That sort of thing. I mean, that might be,
The federal government has moved in that direction, obviously, in terms of limiting Russian supply.
yes.
Interesting, though, Evraz is the company that actually provides the pipe for the pipeline. So it gets complicated very quickly, doesn't it, Phil?
Yeah, very, very, very much so. So there is that sort of. I think when people saw that originally from the premier, and I believe Pierre Poilievre said something similar about the need to develop oil and gas here, so people like Putin have less power. I think that was seen as inappropriate, but I think there is a legitimate conversation to be had there about how did Putin get so powerful? He's leading a country that does not have much going for it other than its energy industry.
Switching gears a bit, because there's so much that's happening this week. One other thing that I think the Sask party government is happy about, because governments are and parties are always happy when their opposition is in turmoil. Turmoil is often caused by leadership contests. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that within NDP ranks after last week's resignation of Ryan Meilis and after what seems to be a significant amount of trouble of kickstarting the NDP leadership into a really competitive race in which we're going to see a lot of voices heard, good debate, membership sold, etc. It doesn't look like that is going to be the kind of NDP leadership race we're going to see, Jeremy. Can you update us on where we're at, who's in, who's out, because that picture is becoming slightly clearer, and roughly when that contest will now take place?
Yeah, it is interesting to see how this is unfolding so far. I think we've seen more news about who is not running than who is running at this point. Um, Carla Beck is a name that was mentioned earlier this week, and she says she's considering to run. She's the NDP's education critic, and she's receiving some endorsement from Trent Witherspoon and Nicole Sauer, who both said they're not going to run for leadership. It was kind of surprising. Well, I don't know. It was surprising to me that Nicole didn't throw her hat in the ring, just because she was the interim leader, and I think a lot of people had been rooting for her or expecting her to put her name forward.
Did you
So,
happen to notice this morning that Carla Beck changed her Twitter handle from Carla for Lakeview to Carla for Saskatchewan?
oh, there you go.
Yes.
That's it. No, it's yeah, an important signal there for sure. So yeah, those two. I know we saw Charlie Clark, Mayor of Saskatoon, also say previously he's not going to run for leadership. There is another name floating out there, Dion, and I want you to pronounce his last name because I'm probably going to get it incorrect.
Trzaskowski.
Traju- Drzuski, yes. So I briefly chatted with him yesterday, and he is talking with people in caucus and the party just to gauge whether he should run or not. He's still considering. No word on that, if you will, officially. But that's where we really are with this. And I mean, like you mentioned in your column, it could be a coronation, just with one leader coming forward and taking over. And that might not be the best idea for them. But yeah, we'll see how it unfolds. Yep.
You did a fascinating piece this week, I thought, Bill, on taking a bird's eye view of how the Saskatchewan NDP now compare with NDP leaders and parties elsewhere in the West and in the prairies. And I found that interesting because we traditionally, I think you and I have talked about this, how Saskatchewan has changed from having the NDP that was the so-called natural governing party to probably having the NDP that's maybe least likely to form government in Western Canada. What's your thoughts, and what observations did you gather from in preparation for that column? Because I thought it was kind of interesting to do that comparison to how much we've changed from other provinces. Like, this was the home of the NDP, the CCF, Tommy Douglas, the first Medicare, the first socially democratic government in North America. We don't think of Saskatchewan that way anymore. And what's your thoughts as to how that's evolved, Phil?
Well, I'll start in BC, where the NDP is governing, and a lot of certainly there's a lot of parties who suffered as a result of the pandemic, right? That their popularity has dropped. That hasn't seemed to be the case in BC. They're still leading the polls, and the NDP is not the natural governing party of BC. It's a party they occasionally turn to when whatever right-wing party kind of messes up so much that people don't want to elect them anymore. So you certainly have an electorate there that's prepared to abandon the NDP if they don't like what they're doing. We know that Rachel Notley, a former premier, who some might have questioned, well, why is she sticking around after she was defeated? Well, it seems like a good idea now. She's leading the polls. They may replace Jason Kenney in Manitoba. Brian Pallister already stepped down because of unpopularity and criticism of his handling of the pandemic. And the NDP leads the polls there. They have Wab Kinu's leading the party, the NDP there. He could become the first Indigenous premier of Manitoba. And here in Saskatchewan, I think it'd be difficult for people to argue that that the Scott Moe's Saskatchewan Party government has handled the pandemic any better. Some would argue that he's handled it much worse. And yet, there's no indication that the NDP has gained ground. Ryan Meilis had 4 years as leader to build support, which is less than Lingenfelter had, and Broughton before him. So we're sort of left to wonder whether, are they just picking the wrong leaders, or is there something in about the party that has become unelectable? You pointed out in a column that, the Sask party became electable when it removed its plan to sell the crowns. I don't know that there's anything in the NDP platform that people are saying, well, I can't vote for them because of that. There just seems to be this perception around them and I think part of the reason that Ryan Meilis struggled a bit is people thought that Nicole Sauer did a really good job as interim leader, and that she would be the natural person to run again, and that's not the case. I'm surprised by that too, and I agree with you that a coronation of one person is going to be not good for this, but not good for any party really ever. But
Jeremy, are you sensing that there's disappointment within the party that both Young, who hasn't sort of officially made it known yet, but seems to be leaning towards not running, or very much leaning towards not running, and that Nicole Sauer, who obviously has said she is not running, do you sense a significant amount of disappointment in that? They're really trying hard not to sell Carla Beck as a second or third or fourth choice, but that's a bit of a struggle, isn't it?
It is a struggle. I don't know if I'm sensing disappointment. That's really hard to gauge right now. In terms of Young, I texted her, I think it was a couple of days ago, and she says she's going to have more to say later this week. So we'll see what she says there. But I don't know, there is a difference, right? I mean, Carla Beck has been in the party longer. Like you mentioned, she has those rural roots. She has those endorsements where, people like Young or even Betty Nippy Albright, who is not running, a little bit more vocal, a little bit more, they do politics a little bit differently, the more social media style. Maybe that appeals more to younger folks. I'm not sure, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see if those potential divisions come out in terms of which side they support. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think. I think
Go ahead, Phil. I was just going to ask you what you think the party's going to look like in 3-4 months from now.
Yeah, well, I think we said when we were speaking earlier this week, I don't think Carla Beck would have been on my top 5 list of candidates that I would even expect to run, much less be coronated. But then again, when you think back, would Scott Moe have been on the top of your list of leaders of the Sask party when he was elected? He was, but then again, he was elected kind of as a compromise candidate. There was certain people who didn't want certain candidates to win, and they sort of coalesced around Moe. Very different situation if you have one credible candidate running that people are just going to, but you never know, right? People didn't think Bernie Sanders was going to pick up support against Hillary Clinton years ago, and of course he ended up uh, doing just that and making her life pretty miserable. So yeah, it's politics, right? So yeah, it's tough to say. It all depends on whether someone else enters the race and makes this an actual leadership contest.
So much to talk about and so much ground to cover. We'll be watching this for the weeks ahead, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this week's edition of Inside the Marble Palace. Jeremy, Phil, thanks for covering so much ground, and thanks for your contribution. It's fascinating right now, isn't it?